Hello, and welcome to another episode of King Paramount's Canal Adventures. Today we're going to take a break from going for walks and we're going to go for a cruise, albeit an extremely short one, about 350 yards in total. What I thought I'd do is give you a real-time view of me single-handing a boat through a lock, which is a very different experience to taking a boat through as crew. This unavoidably involves me appearing on camera for a bit of it, which I don't like. I am autistic, but it's unavoidable in this instance. Now, the first thing you need to do when you approach a lock is to tie up and then go and operate the lock, and you're going to be going backwards and forwards between the boat and the lock quite a lot. You will also notice, by the way, some of the worst handheld photography you will ever see, and that's because obviously I'm trying to operate the lock whilst holding the camera with my other hand, so sorry about that. The bit below the lock where you tie up is called a lock landing. This particular lock landing presents something of a challenge because it is simultaneously a lock landing and also a water point and also a winding hole, and there's some boats really close by. Nevertheless, see what I mean about the terrible videography? Nevertheless, I'm going to pull the boat in here and tie it up. When you reverse the boat, it tends to kick the stern out from the bank, so you then have to put in opposite rudder to get it in again, so the boat always ends up on the wonk. So I'm pulling it in. You'll notice I have caught one of the fenders in the midline. That's just bad rope management. But you know, this is me actually doing it, so things are going to go slightly sideways. Literally in this case. However, I've now tied up, or I'm now in the process of tying up the boat. I don't need to literally tie a knot, I just need to wrap it a few times around the bollard and that will be enough. And then I can go and get my lock windlass and set the lock. So that's what we're going to do next, just as soon as we have this sorted. Right, here we are, and what we're doing here is I'm just getting my life sorted out and finding my lock windlass and so on and so forth. One of the things about going through a lock is that quite often there's people who want to walk across it or want to use it or want to say hello, and so, you know, the whole process is not a fast process, to be honest with you. If you are in a hurry, you've very much chosen the wrong form of transport. Because this is a real-time video, there are quite a lot of videos in which, or quite a lot of parts of this video, in which nothing whatsoever is happening. And that's just the way that it is. Now, when you operate a lock, you need your own lock windlass. Loads and loads of different types are available. My favourite type looks like this. It's got 4 holes in it. The small holes are for the locks that we are on at the moment. The large holes are for different types of locks, mainly on rivers. And you will have noticed that there are 2 small holes and 2 big holes, which gives you 2 different possible lengths of windlass. You can set the windlass to be longer to give you a bigger turning moment when you're winding the paddles up, and shorter to be easier to turn when you let them down again. But walking up here, the first thing you can see is that the lock is full, so we have to empty the lock first. So, checking the windlass has its ratchet on it, that's the bit behind the post, and I put the windlass on, and then we wind the gate up. Now this is a sort of hole in the lock gate that has a paddle which rises up as you turn the handle, and that's going to let water out. So once I've finished winding it up, struggling to manage both the camera and the windlass here, but once I've finished winding it up, you should see some water sort of starting to blossom out on the far side. That's because the water shoots out at an angle. So let's have a look and see if the water's coming out. Yes, it is. Excellent. So that's one side. Now we're going to go across and do the other side. and we should start to see the water level actually in the lock drop as we let the water run out of the gates, a bit like pulling the plug out of a bath. And like pulling the plug out of a bath, it starts quickly and slows down towards the end, and it does take its time. And in fact, in a minute we're going to go back to a video from the front of the boat in which you can just see how long it takes to fully empty. So that's us open. There's some nice water flowing out, quite fast to begin with. And if I had crew, I would have one on each side of the lock ready to open both gates. But because it's just me, I'm going to be lazy and only open one gate, try and go in through a much narrower gap, which you will see a bit later in the video is ultimately successful with only a few bumps. So this is me. You can see me up on the lock there. I don't like being on camera, as I think I've said, so I think what I do in a minute is just wander around the back of the shed you can see on the left, which contains a water gauging station, and just hide for a bit. However, we now have to wait for the lock to empty, and that's what we're going to do now. Enjoy your slow TV. I've just realised I'm probably on camera, and I'm now going to hide. Okay, I've noticed the lock is probably empty now. You can see that I'm coming back. Now, one of the things about this is that if I'm single-handing, I kind of want to do as much as possible from the towpath side of the lock, because if I keep on needing to cross the lock, I'll need to walk across the lock gates a lot of times, and you add a lot of extra distance. So what I'm going to do is, even though it's not 100% empty yet, it's probably about 97% empty, I'm going to wind down this paddle so that I then don't have to walk across the lock and wind it down once I'm in. So I'll wind down the paddle on the offside, and that means I can still carry on emptying the lock for the last little bit from the paddle on the other side. However, I'm not going to close the paddle on the other side until such time as I have opened the lock gate, just so I can, you know, avoid accidentally closing the paddle a bit too early and then you can't open the gate. If there's a difference of only 2 inches, you'll find it very, very different, in the water levels that is, you'll find it very, very difficult to open the gate. So actually, what you will see here is slightly awkward. This is me filming me trying to close the paddle, really unsuccessfully. You need 2 hands to close the paddle, and then in a minute I abandon it, put the paddle back up again, and then go and open the gate. So yeah, this is the magic of rubbish YouTube videos, ladies and gentlemen. Nevertheless, I promised you it's all in real time, and real time it is. Obviously, these 30 seconds I wouldn't actually be doing. I certainly wouldn't be winding down paddles and then winding up paddles, you know, more than once in order to try and get a good shot. But you know, we will pretend that didn't happen. And how good a shot did I get? I mean, not a brilliant one, but there you go. One thing is, if you leave your windlass on the lock beam like that, it will fall into the water. So you tend to hook it around that staple, just to, you know, give it a little bit of protection. And then with the paddle open, which is definitely open from when I opened it and hasn't been up and down 3 times to try and get a clip which didn't work, I then just lean against the balance beam to open the gate. I'm not pushing as hard as I possibly can. I'm not in that much of a hurry, and I'm far too fat and old to put much effort in. So I'm just leaning against it. And only once the gate is open, I will then go and close the paddle. Please note the enormous pile of debris which builds up in a lock, which some kind person has raked out and put by the side. So I don't think I can actually do this while filming, so I didn't film it. However, next order of business is to walk back to the boat, and I've got to get the boat into the lock through a single gate which is 2 inches wider. The gap is 2 inches wider than the boat is, so it's a bit like threading a needle. And the thing is that boats steer from the middle, so you'll see the slight manoeuvre I have to do, but first I'll need to start the engine. There we go, engine started. The little red light that's there is because the alternator to charge the boat doesn't kick in until the boat's going a little bit, or the engine's going a little bit. So, engine started, and now it's time to take the centre line off and make sure it's laying along the boat where it's not going to get tangled up with anything, which was the marvellous job I failed to do before starting this video. And then we're going to go into the lock. And again, I guess the interesting thing here is to see how I have to steer it into the lock. Before we do that, I'm going to say I did actually hit the side of the canal going into it. I mean, A, that happens, you know, you just try not to, but it does. But B, in this particular instance, I had a choice of very gently scraping the stonework on the way in, or absolutely twocking the wooden gate. And of the two, I'd rather scrape the stonework because, you know, the gate is more fragile. I did go down and try to film myself taking this off and it didn't work. I mean, look, I can get through a lot faster than this when I'm not filming, but to be honest, it's not a great deal faster. And I know I did promise you slow TV, so that is what you're going to get. Man, I hate being on video. Okay, again, I would totally have untangled this line as well if I had more than one hand to do it with. However, this is the interesting bit, I think, which is, let's look at how I'm steering. You'll notice when I set off, I'm setting my nose pointing towards the closed lock gate. And that's because as I turn to the right, my nose is going to turn to the right, my bow is going to turn to the right, and my stern is going to turn to the left. So it's going to pivot in the middle. If you have a look right by the last black and white mushroom on the right hand side, you can see there's a sort of little bit where the, there you go, where the bit where the canal comes out a little bit, and that's where I gently scrape. But it looks for all the world that I'm going to hit that gate. But then when I put in the turn, I straighten up the boat and actually go through quite nicely. Now I could stay on the stern of this boat all the way into the lock, but that would mean having to climb out. In this lock it's not a problem, you just climb onto the roof and step off. But if it's a deep lock, you don't actually have to climb up that ladder you can see on the right hand side. So I'm not doing that. I'm waiting until the stern just before the lock gate, then I'm jumping off the boat and letting it float in and holding onto the centre line, and I'm going to tie it around that massive wooden post you see on the right hand side. Ooh, that was the little bump. And then I can tie the boat off, and then we can close the gate behind me and start to fill the lock. Whilst you're doing this, it's a bit of a pain in the arse for passers-by, because the lock gate we're coming through has got lovely railings on both sides, and the lock gate that I haven't opened yet is much narrower, much wobblier, and more difficult to walk over, especially if you have a teeny tiny dog. But she appears to be managing all right. Look at that, managed beautifully, and was a shopping trolley as well. One thing that will become important, you can see the gates are leaking slightly, actually not very much for lock gates, they all leak to a certain extent, but that's useful for me because I can see how full the lock is by how far above the level of the water the leaks are. And actually that is relevant and useful. I'll show you a little clip of it later. The other thing is that at the top gate there's not two paddles, you can see two paddles, but there's two further paddles on the ground just in front of the gates. They're called ground paddles for obvious reasons, and they let water in not through the gates but round through the sides of the lock. And that's because if you open the gate paddles, they're actually above the level of the water at the moment, so it would fire water at the front of the boat, which is not a great idea. Anyway, next job on the agenda is to close this gate. In order to get it started, it's a good idea to pull it. Okay, once it's significantly moved, you can go the other side and push it, but if you slip when you're pushing it, then you slip into the canal, which is, generally a poor plan. In any case, we have now got that gate closed, so now we have to pull out the other bath plug, if you see what I mean. Actually, more or less, it's the equivalent to the taps in a bath, I suppose. So I'm going to get my windlass, and as I said, we're going to open the ground paddles first. Can you see the ground paddles? Now those are the gate paddles, and you can see the gate leaking slightly, and these are the ground paddles. You only need one hand to open them, but you need two hands to close them because they've got an auto ratchet on them. So up comes the ground paddle, and you should see water starting to surge into the lock. So now what I'm going to go and do is do the other ground paddle. Just checking that was fully open. Sometimes they get blocked with branches and so on. So across the wibbly wobbly lock gate, being careful not to fall in whilst holding a windlass and a camera. And the other ground paddle if you've got a terribly posh, expensive boat, you might want to open these paddles half first and let the water sort of gently go in first before whopping them open. I don't, so I just whop them open. And you can see water leaking out of the gate paddle down at the sort of centre of your picture. So you can see the gate paddle is very nearly underwater now. And as soon as it is, I'll clock the gate paddles open, which will fill the lock faster. There we go, up it comes. And then I think I decided against trying to film the other one. Just walked over. There you go. Film me from the front. So this is me walking across, and I'll open the other gate paddle as well. You can see actually the lock is nearly full already. It doesn't take that long to fill up, because we've got 4 big holes at the top end rather than 2 as at the bottom end. Now, again, I want to operate this lock from the towpath side, which is on the right of your screen, as much as I possibly can. But before then, I need to wait until I'm reasonably certain that the lock is fullish. And to do that, what I'm going to do is have a look in the corner of the lock, bang in the middle of your screen. You can see a teeny tiny little bit of white, and that's the water dribbling through. And as soon as that white more or less disappears, then it's time to close the paddles on the off side, walk back, and then try and open the near side gate. It can be difficult to know when it is time to close the paddles. By the time it's very nearly level anyway, it doesn't matter if you close a couple of the holes, because you're not really slowing down the water. If you think about, a bucket with half of the bottom missing will empty very nearly as half as the bucket with all of the bottom missing. So actually at this point in time, closing off the paddles on this side isn't going to make a big difference for the last inch or so. And also I think we're pretty nearly there. If you try and open a gate and it's not there, it just won't open. If you try and sort of bounce it with your bum by pushing, you can sometimes tell by how bouncy it is when it's nearly ready to open. Although on this occasion, actually this is quite a well-behaved lock, and it just, there you go. It's equalised already, you can see the gap. Now, there's an important thing here. The etiquette of locks is that you leave them with all the gates closed and all the paddles down, so that you leave them in a completely neutral state, so that whoever's coming from which end can start again and have it straightforward. There are some locks which you're told to leave either empty or full. You're not told either here. You're just invited to close the paddles behind you. Now it looks like I'm going to leave one of the gates open, and that's because there's a water point about 100 yards further on. So I'm going to go through more up at the water point and then walk back and close the gates. I'm not being a canal vandal, promise. So this is me untying from the enormous great big wooden bollard, which is original, rather than the little mushroom metal ones which are not. Let's see if I can avoid having that fender tangle up in the rip again. Spoiler alert, I usually can't. Up, the centre line goes, and off we go. Nothing on a canal happens at all fast. So if I was going to carry on and there was nothing for miles and miles and miles, I would moor up at this lock landing just on the right, and then go back. As I say, this lock is very busy. There's water points, there's winding holes. There is a company which hires day cruises at the top, and so the space to get in there and moor up is tight and, you know, difficult. The other thing I could do is stop here and tie my stern rope to that great big wooden bollard on the right, quickly jump off, quickly close the gates, jump on and go again. I'm not choosing to do that in this instance because I know I'm going to be stopping. If you have a look ahead, you can see that there is a pipe bridge across the canal, and just beyond it, I think, there is a brick building, and that's the services block where I'm going to stop to empty the toilet and throw my rubbish out and fill up with water. That's the day boat. It's called Elizabeth of Glamis. I think that's the Queen Mother, isn't it? And it's not this brick building we're stopping at, it's the next one. Please note, I'm not going very fast. I'm not going anywhere near 4 miles an hour. And the reason why I'm not going very fast is twofold. Firstly, obviously I know I'm going to stop in a minute, so there's no point in putting all that energy into getting the boat moving only to have to take it out again. But secondly, all these boats are moored, and they have various people either living or staying on them at various times, and you know, they don't probably appreciate having boats zooming past at 1,000,000 miles an hour, rocking them up and down and bumping everything around and scraping paint and so on. So when you go past moored boats, you go at a really gentle pace. As I've said a few times before, if you're in a hurry, you have chosen the wrong form of transport. Quite like this boat on the right. It's a Broad's cruiser. No idea how he's managed to get it down here, but he has. I think it's a liverboard. And bang in the centre of the picture ahead of you, that's the services block. That's what we're heading for. So you can see why I didn't bother to close the gate. I'm going to be going back there in a minute. I should say, this is a good time to say, I suppose, that I know the colour balance on my front camera is absolutely carked, and that's because it's a horrible cheap Chinese camera. My nice one broke, so I've got one reasonable camera and one horrific camera. But there's the water point on the right hand side. This is me reversing like Billy-O to get the boat to stop. Mooring line comes off, and this has got mooring rings, so I can tie up, and that is that. I'm not going to bother putting the video in of me walking back to close the log gate. You'll just have to take my word for it. In any case, I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and if you have, please do like and subscribe. In any case, I shall see you all for the next video next time. Goodbye.